Okay, so when you hear the name St. Patrick, what comes to mind? Probably shamrocks, right? Green rivers, big parades. But the real story? Wow, it's so much darker, way more complicated, and honestly, unbelievably inspiring. We're going to get into the true story of the man behind the legend. And this quote, this one line from Patrick's own writing, it just changes everything. Many remember the saint. I remember the slave. You see, before he was ever a saint, he was a slave. His story doesn't kick off with miracles. Nope, it starts with absolute trauma.
And that brings us to the core question of his entire life, the thing that makes his story so mind-blowing. I mean, think about it. What if a slave returned to the very land of his suffering, not with revenge, but with forgiveness? It's one thing to escape, right? But to go back to the people who hurt you with a message of love? How is that even possible?
Right? So, to really get who this man was, we can't start with the statues and the holidays. We have to start with what he lost. We have to begin with the slave. And what's just incredible is how Patrick himself saw it. In his own words, he lost everything: home, comfort, youth, all that false confidence. For him, this wasn't just some horrible tragedy. It was like a crucible. It burned away all the easy, superficial stuff he thought was faith and left him with something real, something truly unbreakable. So let's rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Before all the hardship, before he was a slave, he was just a boy. A boy living a pretty good life, one he had no idea was about to shatter. You know, he was the son of a deacon in Roman Britain, so his life was comfortable. He had peace, plenty of food, a good education. He was basically a typical teenager who'd never known real hardship, and he fully admits he took every bit of it for granted. And this little bit of dialogue, it's just chilling. Young Patrick complains, "You both speak as if sorrow is waiting just outside the door." And his father just replies, "It often is." Oof, Patrick has no clue how right he is. Because just moments later, sorrow doesn't just knock on the door. It kicks it right off its hinges. And then it happens. Irish raiders storm his family's villa, and in one violent flash, his entire world is just gone. He describes it so powerfully. "I did not know, when they took my arm, that they had taken my life in two." That one moment, the feeling of that hand grabbing him, that was it. That was the line between before and after. So he's dragged across the sea to Ireland, sold into slavery. And for the next 6 years, his life is tending sheep on some cold, lonely hillside. I mean, can you imagine? It was a time of unbelievable suffering, but it's also where the real transformation, the awakening, begins. And look at this comparison. It just lays it all out. His old life was peace and learning. Now it's silence and hunger. Comfort becomes cold. The faith he kind of just talked about before, now it's the only thing he has. That false confidence of a teenager, totally gone, replaced by just utter dependence. His master, a guy named Miliuk, had this cruel saying, "An empty stomach listens better than a full one." That was Patrick's world. Hunger, cold, being treated like you're not even human. He was just property, a thing to be used. But here's the thing. It's out there, alone on those hills, that something shifted. He said, "I had heard holy words before. On those hills I began, at last, to mean them." Prayer wasn't a chore anymore. It became his lifeline, his only source of strength. This is where it all became real for him.
Okay, so after 6 brutal years, he does it. He escapes. But his story is so far from over. In fact, you could say the hardest part hadn't even started yet, because it wasn't really about escaping. It was about the unbelievable call he'd receive to go back.
And his escape, it was this insane ordeal. First, a voice in a dream literally tells him, "Your ship is ready." So he runs 200 miles across a country he doesn't know. He gets to the coast, finds a ship, and the captain says, "No, you can't come." It's only when he's at his absolute lowest, when he just prays for help, that the captain suddenly changes his mind. The whole thing was just an incredible test of his newfound faith. So he gets home, he's safe, he's with his family, back to his old life, and then the dreams start. And they're not nightmares of his time there. No. He hears the voices of the Irish people, the same people who captured him, his enslavers, and they're calling out to him, "We ask you, holy servant boy, to come and walk among us once more." Can you even imagine? And this led him to this profound conclusion. He realized he wasn't saved just to go back to being comfortable. He survived for a reason. All that suffering had forged a new purpose in him, and that purpose was definitely not to just sit back and enjoy his freedom. So he does it. He actually goes back. Years later, after becoming a priest, he willingly sails back to the land that enslaved him. And he doesn't just sneak in, oh no. He shows up with this huge, defiant act, a fire of forgiveness, you could say, that's a direct challenge to the powers that be. So picture this. It's the eve of a huge pagan festival. The law is no one can light a fire until the High King lights his. It's a huge deal. And what does Patrick do? He goes to a prominent hill overlooking the king's own court and lights a massive bonfire. So of course the king, a guy named Laguerre, summons him and asks, "Are you careless or are you brave?"
And Patrick's reply just completely flips the script. He says he's neither careless nor brave. He's obedient to the Lord who made both kings and slaves. See what he did there? He's saying your authority, it has a limit. I answer to a higher power, one that created both of us. It's an incredible power move.
And get this, even the king's own druid, his spiritual advisor, sees what's really happening. He warns the king, do not mistake calm for weakness. Men like this change countries. He recognized that this quiet, unwavering faith was more powerful than any army. And this really gets to the core of his whole mission. He tells them, I have not come to shame Ireland. And then the kicker, I have come because God did not leave me to hate you. Wow. It's not about revenge. It's not about payback. It's about this radical, almost unbelievable act of forgiveness. It's about refusing to let hate win. And that's the ultimate discovery he made. Freedom wasn't just escaping his master. Real freedom, that was healing from hatred. It was breaking the chains of bitterness and resentment that could have easily and justifiably consumed him. It was finding the strength to return with love to the place that caused him so much pain. I think he summed it all up perfectly himself when he wrote, I was taken to Ireland in chains. I returned by grace. He was dragged there as a piece of property, and he chose to walk back as a messenger of grace. So, next time you hear the name St. Patrick, yeah, think of the holiday, but also remember the slave who found a kind of freedom that is honestly deeper than most of us can even imagine.